In a desolate and barren house, a girl named Lena was being harassed by a group of men. They had tied her hands and were surrounding her as if playing a cruel game. One of them, with a disturbing grin, remarked mockingly about how her chest jiggled as she struggled. Another man encouraged her to resist more, watching her discomfort with perverse amusement. Both men began to misbehave with her, completely disregarding the fear in her eyes. She appeared utterly tense, on the verge of tears, yet neither of them showed any sign of stopping their torment. One of the men eventually declared that they had played around enough and that it was time to get serious. But at that moment, the door suddenly swung open, and a man named Alan entered the house. He warned the men, stating that Lena was in that state precisely because of their actions. The intruding men looked at Alan with confusion, questioning who he was. One of them asked in surprise who he thought he was to just barge in like that, and sarcastically added that he should have knocked first. That man even asked if Alan had come for Lena too. Alan didn't respond verbally at first. Instead, he walked forward and picked up a rod lying nearby. The men began laughing at him, mocking him for thinking he could fight all of them with just a rod. They asked whether he truly believed he could take them on. Alan simply replied that he had no interest in giving a monologue, and if they understood his intent, there was no need to waste more time. The men briefly hesitated, trying to assess whether Alan was really serious about fighting them. One of them lunged at him with a punch, but Alan managed to dodge it swiftly. The man was visibly shocked by Alan's reflexes. Without hesitation, Alan raised the rod and began striking them. Another man stepped forward, accusing Alan of being on drugs, threatening to kill him before attacking. But Alan overpowered that man as well and continued to beat the others, one after another, until all of them lay injured and unconscious on the floor. With the immediate danger neutralized, Alan walked toward Lena. She assumed that he had come to save her from those men and expected him to untie her. But Alan only stared at her in silence. Confused and growing desperate, she asked why he was just standing there and not freeing her. Alan, with a detached tone, asked her why he should do that. She looked at him in disbelief, questioning whether he wasn't there to help her. Alan admitted that he hadn't particularly come to save her, and asked if he should really untie her. Lena began to cry, saying that she had thought he was trying to help. Alan then told her that he could help her for 30 shillings. Outraged, she shouted at him, accusing him of demanding money from someone so helpless. But Alan calmly responded that he no longer did favors for free. She asked him if he was serious about his demand. Alan reminded her that the townspeople might soon find her like that, and whether she wanted to take that risk. Realizing she had no other option, Lena agreed to the deal. After receiving the money, Alan untied her and walked away, heading toward his residence. When he opened the door and stepped inside, an old man shouted at him angrily, demanding to know why he had returned so late and calling him arrogant. Alan tried to explain himself, offering some excuses. The old man scolded him further, questioning whether he had lost his mind. After a pause, the old man pointed to some food and told him to help himself. Alan replied with a simple "all right," and the old man went to his room. Left alone, Alan sat quietly and began to reflect on his past. Thoughts flooded his mind, and he acknowledged that he had truly returned to the past. He recalled everything vividly. He remembered a moment when a goddess had appeared before him, asking whether he was truly sure about his decision and warning him that he might regret it. He had told the goddess with certainty that he would not. The angel had questioned whether he even understood what he was wishing for, emphasizing that sending him back would also mean the return of the demon lord. Alan had said that he was excited to face the demon lord once again. Goddess, baffled, pointed out that everything he had accomplished so far would be wasted. But Alan had retorted that there was nothing left for him anyway. Becoming half-crippled, betrayed and discarded by his own comrades, none of it had been worth the sacrifice. He accused the angel of stealing his power, which had led him into ruin. The goddess insisted it was done for the balance of the world, but Alan refused to accept that justification. He said he could never forgive the people responsible for the injustice he had endured. He spoke bitterly of Saint Marian Delarossi, who, despite her holy status, had never once healed him during their adventures, making the journey to slay the demon Lord Hellish. Then there was Genoa Darius, head of the Holy Knights, who had always looked down on him due to her noble birth and was the first to flee in any real danger. Lastly, he mentioned Karen Cross from the Magic Tower, who had only been interested in his immortal body and used him as material for her experiments. But the worst betrayal came the day he slew the demon lord, lost his powers, and became a cripple. Everyone abandoned him. He had wandered the world alone until his death, aided by no one. The goddess had said that was why she was there, to grant him one wish. Alan had replied that he had already made his choice. The goddess tried to offer alternative paths if revenge was truly his goal, but Alan remained firm. His wish was to return to the time before he had been chosen as the hero, so he could seek revenge. Back in the present, Alan was exercising in the backyard, thinking that he had grown rusty. He admitted to himself that while it felt good to be back in the past, he still needed more time to prepare for his revenge. Just then, he sensed someone nearby. There was someone hiding behind a tree, Lena, watching him secretly. She wondered whether he had noticed her. Alan walked over to her and asked what she was doing. Spying on someone like that. Startled, Lena stammered that she wasn't spying. She was simply there to pay him. He asked if that was so, and told her to hand over the money. She gave it to him. After a moment, he asked if she had anything else to say. She muttered that, technically, she was his guest now, couldn't he at least offer her some tea or something? Alan told her to follow him, and she did. As she walked behind him, she found herself thinking in disbelief that she must be going insane. How had she ended up liking someone like him? Alan and Lena stepped inside the house, and without wasting a moment, Alan began counting the money she had handed over. Lena, feeling slightly offended, asked if he seriously believed she hadn't paid him in full. She questioned whether he truly thought she would try to cheat him. Alan, without hesitation, informed her that the total amounted to only 29 shillings. One was missing. She was quick to protest, insisting that he must have miscounted. But as he silently stared at her, she grew nervous and mumbled that perhaps she had dropped a coin along the way. Internally, she wondered why he was looking at her so intently over something as small as a single shilling. Alan, keeping his tone steady, stated that she could repay the remaining amount in other ways. Lena blinked in confusion and asked what he meant by other ways. He calmly responded that, for example, she could join him in a double training session. Embarrassed, she exclaimed that it was too humiliating and urged him to stop making such suggestions. He ignored her discomfort and remarked that he didn't like liars, adding that he was simply going to give her what she wanted. Perplexed, Lena asked what he thought she wanted. Without replying, Alan handed her a resistance band and began a cardio session, declaring that this was only the beginning. Lena, clearly overwhelmed, tried to keep up but pleaded with him to slow down. She explained that it was her first time doing such an intense game and that she wasn't ready for something that difficult. But Alan showed no signs of slowing. He remarked that there was no reason for him to ease up if she was enjoying it so much, and firmly warned her that there would be no breaks just yet. She gasped and called his name, telling him that she was far too sensitive for such a demanding session. As the yoga continued, Lena's eyes wandered, and she noticed a strange mark on Alan's body. Curious, she asked him what it was. Alan replied coolly, saying it was nothing she needed to worry about. With that, the two of them continued their shared experience. One that, though framed as a training session, was charged with confusion, challenge, and an unusual sense of bonding. During their cardio session, Alan couldn't help but comment on Lena's exaggerated reactions. He warned her that she was making quite a scene for someone claiming it was their first time. He added, with a teasing tone, that saying things like that was terribly embarrassing. Shortly after, he asked her if she was ready for the next round of cardio. Lena, breathing heavily, replied that she was simply too exhausted to continue. Alan reminded her of something he had said earlier. Confused, she asked what he meant. He reiterated firmly that he didn't like liars and insisted he could tell she was actually enjoying their cardio session. Lena silently acknowledged to herself that, when he asked her like that, she really couldn't refuse. She admitted aloud that she was ready to continue. Alan gave a slight smirk and told her she was finally being honest with herself. Then, with a playful edge, he added that honest girls deserved to be rewarded. A few days later, Alan and Lena found themselves in the forest, practicing late-night yoga under the stars. As they moved through their poses, Lena asked him how she was doing. He replied that she wasn't bad at all. Then, in his mind, he reflected on how quickly he was improving, crediting his insane regenerative abilities for it. He also admitted, though only to himself, that he might be enjoying the yoga more than he initially cared to admit. Lena, slightly flustered, told him not to flatter her, and then nervously suggested that they should stop. She was worried that someone might see them doing yoga, so Alan, staying focused, told her that if she truly wanted to finish the session, she would need to work a little harder. He advised her to get used to this intensity because there was going to be a lot more of it ahead. Changing the subject, Lena mentioned that she had heard a rumor. The Holy Knights were coming to town. Alan paused and asked with interest. The Holy Knights. Lena confirmed it, saying that according to the townsfolk, the warrior who had once defeated the demon lord was said to be living in their town. She added that even the saint herself was going around in search of him. Smiling, she asked Alan if he wanted to go and check it out together. Alan's thoughts turned serious. The saint, he repeated in his mind. That could only mean Marion Delarossi. A surge of determination passed through him as he realized that the time had finally come. He would soon see her again. And this time, it would be for his revenge. Both of them made their way into the town, where the streets were abuzz with curiosity and excitement. A luxurious carriage rolled to a halt in the town square, drawing everyone's attention. The door opened, and stepping out with a divine grace was none other than Saint Marion Delarossi herself. As the carriage came to a halt in the middle of the town square, Saint Marion Delarossi stepped down with grace and confidence, her ceremonial robes fluttering faintly in the breeze. Without hesitation, her gaze settled on one person among the gathered onlookers, Alan. Lifting her hand, she pointed toward him and calmly asked if he was the prophesied warrior. The crowd murmured in response, but Alan met her eyes with a composed nod and confirmed that he was indeed the one foretold by prophecy. With a measured smile, Marion walked toward him, the calm authority of her presence parting the townsfolk as she moved. Standing before Alan, she formally introduced herself as Saint Marion Delarossi. Alan kept his smile intact, though beneath it, memories stirred memories of a time not so long ago when he had stood before her in desperation after the war. He had begged her for just a single potion, only to be turned away with an apology that she lacked even enough for herself. That moment had etched itself deeply into him, and now, fate had brought them face to face once again, but this time, he had no intention of showing mercy. Before anything else could be said, another woman made her presence known with firm, echoing steps and a sharp voice that cut through the air. Her cold tone questioned if Alan was truly the warrior from prophecy. Her gaze narrowed as she studied him with visible contempt, and her words dripped with disdain as she remarked that, if the prophecy had chosen someone like him, then perhaps it wasn't as divine as people believed. This new arrival was none other than Genoa von Darius, the imposing leader of the Holy Knights. She stepped forward, crossing her arms and addressing Marion directly. With a sneer, she asked if Marion was truly convinced that Alan was the warrior. Marion's expression remained firm as she asked Genoa in return whether she was questioning the will of the divine prophecy itself. Genoa replied coldly that she merely wished to ensure the position was not being granted to someone unworthy. According to her, the title of warrior demanded a certain level of noble status, something she doubted Alan possessed. With biting sarcasm, she added that she wouldn't expect Marion, of all people, to grasp that nuance. Alan remained silent for a moment, his eyes scanning Genoa's rigid posture and the way her chin lifted in superiority. Thoughts surfaced again. He remembered how Genoa and Marion had always shared a strained relationship. The clash between Marion's humble origins and Genoa's aristocratic pride had never eased over the years. Marion, standing her ground, stated clearly that one's status at birth did not determine their destiny. She reiterated with unwavering conviction that Alan was indeed the warrior chosen by prophecy. Unconvinced and growing more irritated, Genoa unsheathed her sword with deliberate slowness and pointed it straight at Alan. Her voice rang out as she challenged him to prove his worth in front of them all. Lena, who had quietly stood beside Alan the entire time, gasped audibly, her face paling with fear. Her voice quivered as she cried out to him, alarmed by the sudden confrontation. But Alan only smirked, his demeanor calm and almost amused. He remarked that it seemed proof was the only thing that would satisfy them. Without warning, he grasped the blade from Genoa's hand, lifted it, and pressed it against his own neck. A clean gash appeared, blood trickling down, but to everyone's astonishment, the wound closed within seconds. His flesh sealed itself effortlessly, as if untouched. No pain, no mark remained. He turned his gaze to Genoa, still smirking. His tone was light, almost mocking, as he asked if that demonstration was enough proof for her. Her expression faltered, caught between disbelief and unease, and Alan couldn't help but enjoy the moment. "Those are some great expressions," he murmured. Later, Alan and Marian sat across from each other at a modest table in a quiet inn, the tension between them still palpable. A small tea set rested between them, the scent of herbs wafting faintly through the air. Marian broached the subject first, asking whether Alan would agree to help them defeat the demon lord. Alan answered that he was willing, but under one condition. Marian raised an eyebrow at this, clearly displeased. She questioned how he could make demands in the face of a divine prophecy. Alan, undeterred, calmly stated that if she found his request unreasonable, she could find someone else to fulfill the role. He had nothing to lose either way. She sighed heavily before finally relenting and agreeing to hear his condition. He leaned back slightly in his chair and spoke evenly. His first request was straightforward. He needed a place to stay, somewhere close to the Guyana temple. Marian considered it for a moment, took a sip of her tea, and nodded in agreement. That could be arranged. Alan nodded in return, then added that he had a second condition, one less material and more personal. Curious now, Marian asked what else he required. He stared at her, his tone sharpening. He had already proven himself as the warrior, but now he needed her to prove something in return. How, he asked, could he trust that she was truly the saint? She looked offended at first, her voice rising slightly as she asked whether he was doubting her. He answered honestly yes, he was. What proof did he have of her divine status? She offered to demonstrate her holy powers, suggesting that casting a sacred spell might satisfy him. But Alan dismissed the idea. Even common priests could cast holy spells, he reminded her. Then, leaning forward, he brought up a rumor he had once heard. The tale claimed that the Saint of Guyana had been born in a brothel, and that every woman from that brothel carried a particular mark on her body. Calmly, yet deliberately, he said that he wanted to see that mark. Marian's eyes widened in disbelief. She asked why he would request something so personal, almost scandalous. Alan's voice remained steady as he explained that she didn't have to comply after all. She was the one who needed him. But if she refused, wouldn't that cast doubt on her identity? Wouldn't it deal a heavy blow to the image of a saint raised in a brothel? He emphasized that it wasn't about indulgence, but principle. If she was asking him to risk everything, then her own authenticity needed to be beyond question. She stared at him, shaken. Her voice dropped as she demanded to know how he had learned such things about her past. He didn't answer, he merely asked again whether she would prove herself or not. After a tense silence, she looked away and spoke through gritted teeth. She would do it, but only if he made it quick. Alan looked at Marian with a skeptical gaze and voiced his concern, insisting that he needed to ensure she wasn't an imposter. Marian sighed, clearly annoyed but resigned, and told him to get it over with. Alan responded coolly, stating that whether or not she would be recognized as the true saint depended entirely on her cooperation. With tense silence between them, Alan examined her closely, claiming that he still couldn't see the supposed mark. Marian, growing more impatient, asked whether they planned to spend the entire day going back and forth about this. Alan remarked that he hadn't seen anything definitive yet, then added, somewhat mockingly, that perhaps she hadn't revealed the area clearly enough. Marian shot back, accusing him of making excuses and not taking the situation seriously. Alan narrowed his eyes, saying he didn't care for jokes and that he wasn't in the mood to be deceived. He muttered something about how easy it would be to fake the title of saint and pressed the matter further. Marian, now visibly frustrated, snapped that she'd show him again, even though the entire ordeal was humiliating to her. She thought bitterly that although she felt degraded, she couldn't afford to return empty-handed after everything that had happened. Alan leaned in again, maintaining a detached tone as he claimed he still wasn't certain. His behavior became more intrusive, and Marian's expression darkened as she firmly demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Alan, with a cold smirk, mocked her indignation. referencing the rumors of her origin and the so-called vulgarity of the mark. Marion finally lost her patience and told him to stop, her voice sharp, desperate, and wounded. He paused briefly, studying her, his expression unreadable. Deep down, he was thinking of his past, the moments that had shaped his grudge, and the bitterness that still lingered. To him, this moment wasn't just about verification, it was about retribution. Marion, on the other hand, was trapped in a confusing mix of shame and disbelief. Her voice trembled as she told him this had nothing to do with proving anything anymore. Alan coldly asked if she was ready for their usual morning training session, feigning innocence. She looked at him with disgust and confusion, insisting there was no way she would want that now. But Alan accused her of hypocrisy, twisting her discomfort into something else, and labeling her no different from others who wore masks of virtue. He justified his behavior as a test, not just of her identity but of her intentions. Marion felt increasingly disoriented, unsure of how the situation had spiraled into something so personal and hurtful. She tried to push back, saying again and again that his assumptions were wrong. But Alan, consumed by his bitterness, kept pressing. Internally, he called her a hypocrite, someone who always seemed to get what she wanted while hiding her true nature. But this time, he vowed, she wouldn't succeed. Marion, exhausted and confused, asked him one last time what exactly he was trying to do. Alan didn't respond directly. His mind was focused not on truth or justice but on the revenge he had spent so long preparing for. Alan had been telling Marion that they weren't finished with their cardio session yet. In response, she questioned him, asking what he meant by that, since it wasn't what they had agreed upon. Alan confirmed it was true, explaining that she had too easily agreed earlier, and that his real intention had been to check whether the mark was still present or not. Marion appeared visibly uncomfortable, and Alan, showing little patience, told her to stop wasting his time and get up, adding that he was still far from completing his cardio routine. Marion looked at him silently, thinking to herself that he was clearly lying and making a fool out of her. She realized that she couldn't just let things continue this way. Something had to be done. Noticing the distracted look on her face, Alan asked if he needed to repeat himself again. Marion, regaining her composure, told him to wait, saying she would handle it on her own. She pointed out that he hadn't mentioned he was planning to do anything else. Alan stared at her and remarked cryptically that a warrior's body had the ability to uncover the truth. Marion, confused and slightly irritated, questioned what kind of gibberish that was. To that, Alan simply told her to find out for herself. Internally, she felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. There's no way I'm feeling this way, she thought. This is just too humiliating. Alan, picking up on her discomfort, joked that she was fun to mess with, calling her Miss Imposter. Then, as if changing the tone entirely, Alan initiated a gaming experience with her. Though Marion joined in, she couldn't shake off the feeling of humiliation. She eventually told him to just hurry up and check the mark. Alan seemed amused and said she was still hung up on that, remarking that he had assumed she was actually enjoying the cardio session. But then he paused and stated that perhaps it was time to end it. He told her to follow him outside once she was ready, claiming he had already seen what he wanted to see. That left Marion even more confused. She hesitantly asked if he was expecting something else from her. Alan, with a sly smile, thought to himself that she would never admit her feelings. Let's see how long she can keep this up, he mused. He silently vowed not to lay a finger on her unless she begged for it. Aloud, he told her to get up quickly, reminding her they still had things to do. A few days later, Alan found himself inside the mansion, now donned in his warrior suit. He gripped his sword tightly, lost in thought. This is only the beginning, he reminded himself. In order to completely dominate Marion, I must not forget why I returned. I didn't come back just to play games. I refused to be used and discarded again, not by my former comrades, not by the Empire, and certainly not by the world. As he stepped outside the mansion, he was met by the presence of all the saints standing in silence. Among them stood Marion, who addressed him calmly, saying, "Welcome, warrior." All of them had taken their seats inside the carriage and were on their way to the capital. However, along the route, a large number of goblins appeared suddenly, armed with bows and arrows. Genoa was riding ahead on horseback when one of the arrows was fired toward her. Without the slightest hint of panic, she casually caught it midair with one hand. Recognizing the situation immediately, she remarked with composed authority that it was an ambush formation of goblins, to be precise. She added that their numbers were just about adequate to pose a manageable threat. Without hesitation, she commanded the soldiers to hold their ground, instructing them that no one was to move from their positions. Marion, watching from inside the carriage, appeared annoyed by the lack of aggression. She questioned Genoa's approach, urging her to simply go out and kill all the goblins. But Genoa, keeping calm, responded that this seemed like the perfect opportunity to test the warrior. She added that for someone like Desi, handling a group like this should be a piece of cake. Marion looked unconvinced and asked whether Alan was really expected to fight against that many opponents on his own. Alan, who had been listening, calmly said that if they wanted to test him, that was perfectly fine, he would play along. However, he warned that this test would go both ways. Genoa narrowed her eyes and asked what he meant by that. Alan replied that he, too, was a bit suspicious of the so-called Knight Commander who couldn't even handle a group of goblins. He said he would deal with them, but once it was over, they would have a duel. For Avish's sake, let's see how fun that could be, he said with a smirk. No take-backs. With that, Alan drew his sword and charged at the goblins, swiftly cutting through their ranks. In a display of remarkable skill and speed, he defeated all of them with ease, leaving not a single enemy standing. Genoa, watching from her position, was clearly surprised at what she had just witnessed. Pointing his sword toward her, Alan asked if she was ready for their duel now. Genoa, offended, demanded to know how a commoner like him had received such training. Alan merely shrugged and replied that he didn't know, he simply copied what he had observed. He added, mockingly, that he hoped she wasn't scared, since backing down would be a disgrace for someone from the great Darius household. Enraged, Genoa pulled out an arrow and shouted at him, asking how he dared to speak about her house in such a manner. She accused him of talking big despite barely being able to hold his ground. And so, the duel between the two began. As they fought, Alan found himself thinking that she was better than he had expected. For a while, he focused only on defense, parrying her swift and aggressive attacks. Eventually, he admitted that he was getting tired of defending and decided to go on the offensive. With one decisive strike, he managed to land a blow that brought Genoa crashing to the ground in the very next second. Later that night, Genoa found herself lying in bed, struggling to accept what had happened. She muttered to herself in disbelief, questioning whether she had truly lost to a mere peasant. Alan, who was sitting beside her, told her that she had been asleep for quite some time. She turned to him with surprise and demanded to know why he was there in such a position. Alan answered calmly, saying that he was there because he wanted to be, and that she had no authority to tell him otherwise. He added that he had simply been bored, and since this situation was quite amusing, he suggested they start their cardio session again. His tone was suggestive, and he said he wanted her to satisfy him as part of their exercise, stating it as his personal wish. Terrified by his words, Genoa immediately replied that she couldn't do such a thing. But Alan wasn't asking. He pointed out that if she was truly of noble blood, she would honor her words and commitments. Genoa, trying to defend herself, said that it had nothing to do with her status or background. Alan, however, began to blackmail her, asking if she would prefer her knights to witness the situation instead. Trapped in fear and humiliation, Genoa thought to herself that she couldn't bring dishonor to her household just this once. She told herself she would have to endure it. Genoa remarked aloud that she had never seen a resistance rod before. Alan, noticing her hesitation, questioned why she was simply standing there and staring at it. He scoffed, adding that he hadn't expected a noble to be even more clueless than a commoner. Genoa explained that it was her first time doing this kind of cardio training. Alan acknowledged her response with a sarcastic nod and said he would teach her then, commenting that at least things were starting to improve. He reminded her that he had already told her to carry out her training, and warned that if she kept stalling, he would have no choice but to drag her outside to continue it there. Genoa insisted that she was doing exactly as he had instructed. But Alan, clearly unimpressed, told her she talked too much. He reminded her that they had dueled over one wish, and now that he had won, she needed to stop complaining and complete the cardio session with him exactly as directed. Though visibly displeased, Genoa had no choice but to comply. Under her breath, She grumbled that the duel hadn't been fair to begin with, then asked if perhaps he was actually afraid of the great house of Darius. Alan, amused by her challenge, asked if she truly planned to talk about what had happened between them. He said that would be quite entertaining in its own right. With a smirk, he added that he considered it an honor to engage in a gaming session with a member of such a noble lineage. That remark angered Genoa, who snapped that they should start slowly at least. As the cardio session began, Genoa found herself unsettled. What is this strange sensation? She wondered. Alan, observing her, casually asked if she was feeling good. Genoa, caught in a storm of unfamiliar emotions, thought to herself that something about her body felt different, almost out of sync. Alan leaned closer and, half teasing, asked whether she was just enjoying herself in her own little world. Genoa drifted further into her thoughts, confused by the sensations coursing through her. Why does my mind feel like it's going blank? She thought helplessly. Alan, meanwhile, seemed invigorated. With a grin, he announced that the cardio session was energizing him more than he had expected. After the training session, Genoa inquired whether it was finally over. Alan responded dismissively, stating that he no longer had any obligation to satisfy her. Genoa, feeling provoked, questioned who exactly had the right to determine if she was satisfied or not. Alan reminded her that she had intended to repay a debt and implied that she was being deceptive. He pointed out that she seemed to forget he was doing her a favor, and he asserted that, on that particular night, she had no right to refuse anything he demanded. He further declared that she would do whatever he wanted, mentioning that he had even given her the chance to challenge him again. He asked rhetorically what more she could possibly want and told her that if she didn't accept his terms, she was free to leave. Reluctantly, Genoa agreed, saying she would comply with whatever he asked. However, she made it clear that she was only doing so because she was being forced. She requested that he wait a moment. Alan, growing impatient, questioned what she meant by wait and told her to stop wasting his time. He warned that he would soon teach her how to properly use her body during the cardio session. Genoa, in response, insisted she didn't need any favors from him, nor did she desire anything of the sort. Yet despite her protests, she couldn't shake the sense that her mind was slipping away from her, drifting beyond her control. Alan reminded her that he would be waiting for a rematch and told her that if she didn't want a repeat of this situation, she had better prepare properly next time. With that, he stood up and exited the tent. As he stepped outside, he noticed Lena standing nearby. Curious, he asked her what she was doing there. Lena explained that she had a lot on her mind and was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened, especially how Alan had suddenly risen to the status of a warrior. Alan, keeping his distance emotionally, responded coldly. He told her that if she didn't have anything meaningful to say, she should just get some rest, as their journey was still far from over. Lena, visibly startled by his indifferent reaction, asked him what he meant by that. Marian was wandering around the area near the tents, her mind restless. She couldn't help but reflect on recent events despite Alan being the warrior. She couldn't comprehend how she had allowed certain things to happen. The thoughts weighed heavily on her, making it difficult for her to sleep properly. As she strolled aimlessly, a sudden sound from the trees caught her attention. She froze, startled by the unexpected noise. Wondering whether it was caused by some animal, she carefully approached the source of the disturbance and peeked through the foliage. To her surprise, she saw a woman and quickly recognized her, thinking that it was the same woman from town. She questioned what Alan and that woman could possibly be doing so late at night in such a secluded area. Marian's thoughts raced. Why were they engaging in a resistance cardio session in the middle of nowhere? Even if they were far from the city, it was still outdoors, and that made her curious. She remained hidden, silently observing. Meanwhile, Alan was engaged in a private training session with Lena. He asked her how she was feeling. Lena responded by saying that doing these sessions with him always made her feel good. She hesitated for a moment, then jokingly brought up the risk. What if a saint happened to see them together? Alan brushed off her concern, asking what she meant by that. Lena quickly retracted her words, saying she was only joking, and urged him to keep his voice down. From her hiding spot, Marian overheard their conversation, which only intensified her inner turmoil. She wondered whether Alan had noticed her presence, and she couldn't stop thinking about Lena's words. Was the session truly that enjoyable for her? The next morning, Genoa confronted Alan in a heated argument. She accused him of winning their previous duel through deceit and insisted she would not fall for the same tricks again. Alan, with his sword in hand, responded calmly, acknowledging her fighting spirit and expressing hope that this duel wouldn't turn out to be boring like the last. Genoa, frustrated, drew her own sword and demanded to know what he meant. Alan, with a slight smirk, commented that he could practically read her thoughts as she stared at the jump rope in the middle of their duel, hardly behavior befitting the commander of knights. Infuriated by his words, Genoa vowed to silence him for good this time. Their duel began once more, but ultimately, Genoa was defeated again. She admitted her loss without excuse, conceding that she had lost fairly. Alan confirmed this and promptly dismissed any further discussion, instructing her to shift her focus to the morning workout session instead. Both of them began the session, and Alan couldn't help but tease her again, pointing out that she had aimed her yoga mat directly at him and sarcastically asking if all members of her household behaved that way. Genoa, offended, warned him not to insult her family. Alan, unmoved, remarked that words would not be enough to teach her, and that he would have to train her through physical demonstration instead. Genoa told Alan that she had already confessed everything and pleaded with him to stop, saying she could no longer continue with the training sessions. In response, Alan questioned her sincerity, asking whether she truly felt remorse for lying to him. She hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed, telling him she would comply with whatever he asked. With a lowered voice and a hint of shame, she apologized, referring to him as warrior and humbly asking for his forgiveness, identifying herself formally as Genoa of House Darius. Alan, surprised yet intrigued, remarked on the situation, noting that the daughter of the prestigious and noble House Darius was now begging him for forgiveness. He then challenged her once more, asking if she genuinely wanted to end the training session and urging her to be honest with herself. He made it clear that, moving forward, there would be one condition. Whenever they were in private, she would be expected to follow all of his instructions without question. Meanwhile, Marion was quietly peeking into the tent. Her curiosity piqued as she observed the unusual interaction between Alan and Genoa. What she saw left her both shocked and astonished. She couldn't believe that the normally proud and self-centered Genoa was willingly engaging in training exercises with that same warrior. The sight contradicted everything she had assumed about Genoa's character. As Marion continued to watch, a memory surfaced in her mind. She recalled the woman from the previous day who had also appeared to enjoy the training session with Alan. The thought unsettled her, and she found herself wondering whether the exercise truly felt that pleasurable, even after all these years. Marion stood quietly, watching from a discreet distance as Genoa and Alan engaged in their training exercises. A wave of surprise washed over her as she observed the scene. Genoa, who was usually so aloof and prideful, appeared to be getting unusually close to the warrior. Marion could hear Genoa's voice clearly, despite being just a short distance away. Genoa was speaking softly to Alan, telling him that she always felt incredibly good whenever she trained with him. The moment made Marion's thoughts wander. A quiet longing stirred within her, and she couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps one day, she might also have the chance to participate in one of those cardio sessions with the warrior. Alan had noticed Marion secretly peeking into the tent while he and Genoa were training. Without hesitation, he walked over to her and questioned her, his tone laced with amused suspicion. He remarked that he hadn't expected her to enjoy watching their exercise sessions and asked what explanation she had for herself. Marion, caught off guard and embarrassed, stammered as she claimed she had only been passing by when she heard some noise and hadn't intended to intrude. Alan didn't press further and simply responded that if that was what she claimed, he'd accept it, though his tone suggested disbelief. Still flustered, Marion then asked Alan if there was anything he wanted her to do. He raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled, and asked what exactly she meant by that. What was it that she was offering? Marion hesitated, her face flushing red as she struggled to find the right words. She began to say that she just wanted to speak to him, calling him warrior, but before she could finish her sentence, Alan cut her off abruptly. He told her that if she had something to say, she should just speak up plainly instead of dancing around the subject. If she didn't, then he saw no reason to linger. Left standing there as he turned away, Marion felt a wave of confusion and disappointment. A part of her believed that he understood what she had been trying to say, yet he chose not to acknowledge it. It left her wondering why he ignored her feelings and why she alone seemed to be left behind. The following morning, Marian sat quietly in the carriage, her mood somber and her expression distant. She hadn't spoken a single word to Alan since that moment. Her mind replayed everything that had happened, and she questioned whether he was still upset about how she had doubted him before. If he was, then why had he grown so close to Genoa in such a short time? Outside the carriage, Alan and Genoa were each mounted on their own horses. Genoa continued trying to engage him in conversation, her voice persistent and light, but Alan eventually told her sternly to stop disturbing him and to get off her horse. Genoa was stunned by his sudden shift in tone and asked what he meant by such a command, insisting that she was only there to support him. Alan gave her a cold glare and ordered her not to talk back. Then his eyes fell on the dress she was wearing, and he remarked that it was the one he had given her. Genoa quickly confirmed that it was. Marian, watching the entire exchange from within the carriage, felt her heart twist with silent jealousy. Eventually, they all arrived at the gates of a large and imposing mansion. Genoa turned to Alan and informed him that they had reached their destination, Lydia, the capital city of Lorraine. Alan's expression changed subtly as he processed the name. It had been a long time since he had last set foot in that place. Memories from his previous life surfaced. He had grown sick of the idea back then, and yet, standing before it in this life, it all felt strange and different. He sensed that he would soon come face to face with familiar figures once again. Images of Emperor Patrick of the Alarain Empire, the first Prince Aaron, and the princess passed through his mind. Just then, Genoa's voice broke through his thoughts as she insisted that she would follow him wherever he went. Before Alan could respond, Marian interjected and calmly suggested that they head to the chapel first, reminding them that it was customary to receive the Pope's blessing before meeting the king. Alan glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but his thoughts were sharp. He believed she was still trying to pull him into her territory, attempting to manipulate the situation in her favor. Silently, he warned her. Her moment of reckoning had not yet arrived, but it would soon. Marian then informed everyone that it was time to proceed to the palace. The group began moving together, and once inside the grand structure, Marian turned to Alan and reminded him that certain protocols and formalities had to be followed. Alan, however, dismissed her suggestion without hesitation, declaring that he would act as he saw fit. He told her bluntly to keep quiet and then threatened to reveal what she had done that night outside, a statement that left Marian mortified and speechless. Humiliated, she asked him what he wanted from her. Alan responded that if she wanted peace, she should simply stay silent, assuring her that he would handle everything on his own. Without another word, he pushed open the large palace doors. Seated before him, high on the throne, was the king. The monarch looked down at him and asked if he was the warrior sent by the goddess. Alan stepped forward, bowed low, and introduced himself as the warrior Alan, offering a formal greeting to the emperor of the great Lorraine Empire. "Long live the king," he added with solemn respect. The king appeared surprised. Despite Alan's origins in the countryside, he seemed to know proper court etiquette. Alan explained that he acted in accordance with the goddess's will. As the audience continued, Alan's eyes scanned the ornate hall, his gaze resting briefly on its many opulent figures. A scent lingered in the air that he recognized, and he couldn't help but think it was the familiar stench of the aristocracy. His attention was suddenly drawn to a particular young woman. He wondered whether she had been present during his past life as well. There was something about her that stirred a bitter memory. She was the one who ruled an entire province despite being nothing more than a royal concubine, the same foolish girl who had driven him to the edge in his previous life. Her name was Hazel. As he observed her quietly, a storm of emotions churned beneath his calm exterior. Now he understood why people called her selfish, but he wouldn't let emotions dictate his actions this time. He reminded himself of the goal that brought him back. He had come to complete what he had set out to do. The king looked down at Alan and gave a firm command for the warrior to raise his head. Once Alan obeyed, the king addressed him directly, saying that, according to his knowledge, the warrior of the goddess was supposed to possess the power of invulnerability. He asked Alan if that meant he was truly immortal. Before Alan could answer, Marian stepped forward and confirmed it was true. She stated confidently that she had personally verified it, and the king could believe her word. But the king's expression shifted to one of irritation. He turned sharply to her and reminded her with scorn that he hadn't directed the question to her. He referred to her not as Marian but as the saint of the Church of Guyana, making her flinch under the weight of his disapproval. Embarrassed, Marian bowed her head and offered a quick apology. Alan then addressed the king directly, calmly acknowledging that such a claim might be difficult to believe. He asked if the king would like him to prove his ability in a more tangible way. Intrigued, the king replied with interest. Alan, however, added that while he was invulnerable, he still felt pain, and he had no desire to injure himself for no reason. Instead, he proposed demonstrating his powers through a duel, pointing his sword toward the back of one particular individual standing nearby. Hazel turned in surprise, clearly shocked, and asked in disbelief if he was referring to her. Alan clarified that he was referring to the head knight of the Butler household, John Miller. Hazel, visibly offended, accused him of lacking basic decency, saying his behavior made sense considering he came from the middle of nowhere. She scoffed that perhaps the goddess's blessing had gone to his head. John, remaining composed, looked to the king silently, as if asking whether he should proceed. The king waved a hand dismissively and told him there was no need to seek permission, he should begin immediately. John turned his gaze toward Alan and told him to blame his own mouth for what was about to happen. And with that, the duel began. John lunged forward, mocking Alan's slow reaction time and calling him a poor excuse for a warrior. But Alan simply began to laugh. He told John that he clearly had only half a brain. Hadn't he already warned them that he was invulnerable? With a swift, calculated move, Alan struck with his sword, landing a clean hit that sliced John's arm. The wound was serious, and John staggered in pain. Alan looked down at him with disdain and commented that it was a disgrace for the head of the knights to fall so easily. He then turned to Hazel, locking eyes with her, and asked if she agreed with what had just happened. Hazel could only glare back in frustration. The king, however, began laughing heartily, clearly entertained by Alan's display. He remarked that it was truly astonishing to see Alan's wounds heal instantly. While he couldn't yet confirm Alan's eternal youth, he added that he was sure he would eventually witness it for himself. Suddenly, the heavy atmosphere shifted as a servant burst into the hall, visibly distressed. The servant approached the king in a rush and urgently informed him that he had troubling news. When the king asked what it was, the servant revealed that the Demon Lord's army had invaded the Butler domain. The king was stunned and struggled to process the information. He asked again for clarification, unable to believe what he was hearing. Alan, standing nearby, watched the scene unfold with a calm, unreadable expression. Inwardly, he wasn't surprised. He had anticipated the arrival of the Demon Lord's forces. It was only a matter of time, and their timing couldn't have been more significant. Of course, this would happen now when tensions were already high. The king then turned to his council and nobles, asking what they believed should be done. The Demon Lord's forces had invaded his homeland, and the urgency of the matter weighed heavily on everyone. Alan stepped forward without hesitation and declared that it was his duty as the warrior to fight against the Demon Lord's army. He said he would handle the demonic forces if he had the king's blessing. The king, silent for a moment, simply nodded. Later, Alan was with Lena, who had approached him with curiosity. She asked how things had gone, and Alan replied with a hint of sarcasm that, as expected, he had been refused. He said the king was too fascinated by his power to simply send him off to a faraway place. Lena asked what would happen to the people living in that region. Alan answered somberly that he would still have to go and protect them eventually. After all, he had partially crippled the Butler domain's defenses by cutting off the arm of its head knight, so it was only natural they would assign him there. Trying to lighten the mood, Lena shifted the topic. She asked if Alan had liked what she did and began to praise him. She admired how he had become so manly, pointing out how far he had come from the timid boy who once couldn't even look her in the eyes. Now, he was a warrior entrusted with protecting the people. Alan, however, responded with quiet regret, saying that those days were long behind him. He apologized for what had happened in the past. Lena, remembering how she used to look down on him and tease him, admitted that if she had known he would go through so much hardship, she might have treated him more kindly. Alan eyed her curiously and asked why she was suddenly trying to earn points with him. Lena looked annoyed and responded that she was just trying to share a genuine moment with him. But if scoring points didn't matter to him, would he still continue to keep her around? Alan smirked and suggested that perhaps they should start doing double morning burn sessions from now on. Lena, still breathless from the session, admitted that it had been a long time since she had exercised like that, and she felt overly sensitive to the one-on-one hit now. Alan, having guided the training session, asked if she was satisfied. She confessed that even though she had demanded more exercises earlier, her body now refused to move. Despite the exhaustion, there was a genuine joy in her expression. She felt happier than she had expected. Alan, noticing the shift in her mood, inquired about what exactly had made her feel that way. Lena responded that it was the moment he told her he would go and save those people. That was when she had felt true happiness. Alan, confused, asked what that had to do with her personally. Lena explained that he probably didn't realize it, given how much he moved around, but their town had only been established recently. Her grandfather and father had both been refugees who fought against monsters for generations. Of course, if the knights had gotten involved, the conflict would have ended in a matter of days, but people like her family didn't matter to the nobility. The knights didn't care to intervene. She admitted that she might be overstepping her boundaries, but she firmly believed that those with power had a duty to protect the weak. What seemed trivial to others could mean life or death for people like her. Alan, sensing the gravity of her words, changed the subject. He said it was time to begin the next gaming experience with resistance band training. Lena, still recovering from the last session, teased him about his serious demeanor during training but admitted inwardly that she appreciated this version of him as well. Then she asked for a promise. She wanted reassurance that he would take care of the situation they had discussed. Alan looked at her and gave a simple but confident response. Taking care of it was precisely why he was there in the first place. Princess Mary Leicester addressed the assembly, speaking with authority about the true purpose of the temple. She reminded them that the temple existed to spread the words of the goddess, to share her blessings, and to reveal her greatness to the masses. That, she explained, had always been the temple's mission. Her gaze then shifted toward Marian, who sat quietly nearby, and she asked if Marian remembered those words from when they first met. Marian responded affirmatively, recalling the moment clearly. Mary continued, noting that the emperor's power continued to grow unchecked, threatening to suppress the temple's authority. To counter that influence, she insisted that the warrior should have visited the temple before setting foot in the palace. Marian lowered her head and apologized. Mary warned her that if the temple failed in its role, Marian would be sent back to the place she came from, something she clearly didn't want. She assured Marian that her wish for the temple's prosperity was not born of personal ambition, but rather of devotion. She urged Marian to always remember that the mission was as much for Marian herself as it was for the goddess. Marian acknowledged her words with understanding. Then Mary Leicester told her to take the warrior for herself. Marian, confused, asked what she meant by that. Mary explained that the warrior and the saint held no meaning without each other. That had always been the case and always would be. She advised Marian to tame the warrior to her liking. After leaving the temple, Marian wandered in thought. She wondered how she could possibly tame someone like Alan, a man bold, courageous, and a little wild. The idea of approaching him the way Genoa did. Marian admitted to herself that she, too, wished for the warrior, though she wasn't sure if she should act on that desire. Caught up in her flustered thoughts, she grew suddenly self-conscious, worrying if anyone had overheard her muttering. She looked around and noticed someone nearby, prompting her to wonder who it could be, since not many people knew about that part of the palace. Meanwhile, at Alan's residence, he and Lena were engaged in private training. Lena looked completely exhausted and admitted she could no longer continue. Alan, however, appeared full of energy and commented that he could still keep going. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Lena panicked, reminding Alan that he had promised no one would come. He responded calmly, suggesting it might be Marian. He went to open the door, only to find Princess Mary Leicester standing there. She greeted him and asked if he was the warrior named Alan. The sight of her triggered sudden flashbacks in Alan's mind, memories from his past life when Mary Leicester had been imprisoned. He had questioned then why she had been locked away, wondering if Prince Aaron had been responsible, and how such a thing had happened while he had been battling the demon lord. He had never even expressed interest in becoming the regent, yet his mere presence had been seen as a threat. In that memory, Mary had reassured him that she was fine and had told him not to worry about her. She had said that she wanted to stay by his side but, ultimately, had urged him to go alone to live for himself and not for others. As Alan returned to the present, he found Mary watching him closely and asking if he was all right. He greeted her respectfully and noted how long it had been. Mary seemed surprised, stating that she didn't recall meeting him before, then wondered if they had crossed paths in the past. Alan vaguely confirmed that they had, if only briefly. She accepted his explanation, saying that he had felt familiar to her and that perhaps that was why. Alan then asked what had brought her there. Mary explained that she had come with a request to ask him to save the people of Butler. Alan asked her why she was making such a demand. She explained that the people of that domain would not be able to endure the crisis on their own, even if the Imperial Knights were deployed. More importantly, she believed that his sudden appearance had meaning. If the Empire could have overcome the crisis by itself, the goddess would not have sent a warrior or a saint. Alan looked at her with quiet admiration, realizing that she still thought of others before herself. He agreed to go. Mary thanked him sincerely. Alan, in return, asked for a favor. When he returned, he wanted her to grant him one request, whatever it might be. The next day, Alan sat in deep thought, reflecting on how unexpected it had been to see Mary Leicester again so soon. He silently apologized, admitting to himself that he had failed to live the life she once asked of him. But this time he promised he would make things right. He would not fail again. As he sat lost in his own thoughts, someone suddenly appeared. It was Marian. She approached him quietly and asked if he could spare some time for her. Marian kept glancing at Alan, frustration bubbling within her. She couldn't understand why he didn't even hesitate or acknowledge her presence the way she hoped. It irritated her deeply. Did he not see her as a woman at all? Why was he always like this around her? The thought gnawed at her. The next day, the two of them rode on horseback. Marian, clearly uncomfortable, winced and complained that her legs were hurting. She couldn't fathom how people endured hours on a horse. She called out to him, addressing him as warrior. Alan turned back and asked, almost teasingly, if she was sure he was a warrior and not her master. Embarrassed and flustered, she told him to stop already, which only made Alan laugh heartily. As they continued, Marian asked how much longer it would take to reach their destination. Admitting that this was her first time riding a horse, Alan informed her that it was just up ahead. Upon arrival, the scene was grim. Crowds of refugees were gathered outside the city walls, pleading for help, crying out for someone to open the gates. Marian was shocked at the sight and immediately asked why the refugees were being kept outside. Alan explained that the city either lacked the space or simply didn't want to waste food on them. Marian protested, saying they would all die like this. Alan's voice turned cold as he questioned her expectations. Did she truly believe that the nobility would stand hand in hand with commoners? He reminded her that the world wasn't so different from the brothel she grew up in, and that she wasn't the only one with a painful past. They entered the palace, where Hazel stood waiting. She welcomed them with a formal tone, apologizing for the lackluster reception, explaining that the current situation made it impossible to provide more. Alan scanned the area, noting the military presence and chaos, and remarked that it was a mess. Hazel confirmed that the Demon Lord's forces were far stronger than expected, and that they urgently needed Alan's help. Just then, a young boy beside Hazel spoke out rudely, questioning who Alan was and accusing him of addressing Hazel too casually. He demanded to know if Alan had any idea who he was. Alan looked at the boy indifferently and asked who the kid was. The boy exploded in outrage, unable to believe Alan's disrespect. Hazel gently reprimanded her son, telling him not to speak that way, and apologized to Alan, explaining that her son, Lloyd, was still young. Alan quietly noted that the name she had called out back at the palace was indeed this boy's. He wondered if Hazel had always had a child or if something had changed. Alan then declared that the palace was too noisy for his taste and requested that everyone leave except for Hazel. Hazel, startled, asked if he truly meant for them to leave the room. Alan confirmed with authority, telling everyone aside from Hazel to move aside. John Miller, the head of the Knights, respectfully excused himself and exited, leaving Alan and Hazel alone. Alan turned to her with a serious tone, questioning why she kept a soldier who was missing an arm around. Hazel replied that he was one of her loyal subordinates and that it was only natural to care for him. Alan then criticized her for abandoning the refugees outside the walls. Hazel, trying to shift the focus, suggested they continue their conversation, reminding him that he was there to help. Alan agreed, at least for the moment. Hazel asked him to help fortify the city's defenses. Alan was deep in thought, realizing that she still had no concern for the people suffering beyond the walls. Nothing had changed since the time John lost his arm. Hazel pleaded once more, asking for his assistance. But Alan couldn't ignore the similarity to the past. In a sudden outburst, he shouted for the gates to be opened, warning that all those people would die if left outside. John, who had returned to stand beside Hazel, turned to her and asked what they should do. Hazel coldly stated that Lloyd's life was more valuable than all of theirs combined. Alan continued to shout, demanding that the gates be opened. At that moment, monsters appeared near the walls. Alan stood in stunned silence, realizing the horrifying truth: he couldn't save all of them on his own. The desperate cries of the people filled the air as they begged the warrior to save them. Conflicted and overwhelmed, Alan was unsure of what action to take. He retreated into the palace and confronted Hazel again. He demanded to know what would happen if he refused to help. He asserted that he had no obligation to work without compensation. Hazel looked at him incredulously and asked how he could say such a thing. He was the warrior, destined to help others. But Alan firmly stated that his duty was to defeat the demon lord, not to defend her territory or act as her servant. If she wanted his services, she would have to pay a price. Hazel, surprised, asked him what kind of price he meant. Alan responded with a blunt condition. He demanded that she bow to him and agree to face him in single combat. He repeated himself to make sure she understood. Hazel, stunned, asked if he was being serious. Alan confirmed it with certainty. He reminded her that she had left all those people outside the wall to die. She attempted to justify her decision, claiming that bringing them inside would only cause chaos and put Lloyd at risk. Alan dismissed her reasoning coldly, stating that her problems were not his. She could either accept his condition or die along with her child. Late at night, Alan and Hazel engaged in a quiet yoga session. As they moved through their stretches, Hazel questioned whether Alan truly called himself a warrior, accusing him of failing to act with the justice expected of such a title. In response, Alan coldly remarked that perhaps she should ask the goddess herself to save her child. Hazel, however, was caught off guard by an unfamiliar sensation, something stirring within her during the session. She couldn't recall the last time she had felt anything quite like that while exercising. Alan, watching her, noted silently that she had no other option besides him. His thoughts wandered as he considered Hazel's situation. He knew she was a widow, and despite that, she maintained an admirable level of physical fitness. It puzzled him, though, and he wondered again whether she truly had a child of her own. As they neared the end of their session, Hazel asked if they were done. Alan, teasingly, responded that she couldn't expect to have all the fun to herself. He joked that the child must have inherited that same vitality directly from her. Hazel deflected his words, stating firmly that everything she did was for Lloyd. Despite her words, she couldn't help but reflect, internally reminding herself that she was merely using the warrior for her own ends. Alan, catching the slight hesitation in her expression, told her that if she didn't wish to continue the exercise, he wouldn't force her. Still curious, he asked again whether the child truly belonged to her. Hazel replied that she had already told him the answer. Alan, unbothered by her story, admitted to himself that he didn't really care about the details. Perhaps, he thought, it was simply because she wasn't young anymore, but she certainly seemed to be enjoying the yoga regardless. Hazel explained that she was only fulfilling Alan's conditions because of Lloyd. Alan echoed the name with mild interest, prompting Hazel to clarify further. She told him that Lloyd was the child of her husband, Lord Buster, and his previous wife. Both Lord Buster and his first wife had passed away prematurely, leaving the child behind. Since then, Hazel had taken on the responsibility of raising Lloyd in their place. Alan questioned why she was so protective toward a child who wasn't biologically hers. Hazel answered with sincerity, revealing that she bore an unrepayable debt to the family. At a time when her own family had fallen into ruin, it was her husband who had helped them recover and rise again. As Alan absorbed her words, he reflected on her situation with a touch of cynicism. It seemed to him that Hazel had likely been sold off into an arranged marriage to save her family a transactional relationship masked as duty. In his eyes, her deep sense of obligation might simply stem from that old arrangement, leading him to wonder whether she was just being naive. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a knock at the door. Lloyd's voice called out as he complained that he was bored of spending time with the saint, whom he dismissed as foolish. He demanded that Hazel open the door, insisting that he wanted to play with her instead. Without waiting, he began to push the door open. Hazel rushed to intercept him, trying to keep him from entering. She gently but firmly told him to wait, explaining that she was still busy. Lloyd, confused and frustrated, questioned why he wasn't allowed inside. He declared that his mother was too boring and pressed again for her to open the door. Alan, unfazed by the interruption, suggested that they finish what they had started. Hazel, clearly flustered and overwhelmed, turned to him with disbelief, questioning his intentions and asking why he was doing this to her. Marian sat restlessly in one of the palace's grand chambers, her gaze lingering on the tall window beside her. The elegant decor and golden details did little to distract her from the passage of time. Her foot tapped impatiently on the marble floor, her thoughts turning bitter as she wondered how much longer she would be expected to sit there like an ornament. Waiting never sat well with her, and something in her gut told her that something wasn't right. The doors creaked open as John entered with a heavy expression. He approached her with a lowered head and informed her that troubling news had arrived when the Demon Lord's army had begun gathering again. Marian rose immediately, startled by the words. A growing alarm seized her as she asked for clarity, and John explained that while an attack had not yet begun, the signs were unmistakable. The enemy forces were preparing, and it was only a matter of time. She asked whether Lady Hazel had been informed, but John admitted that he had not yet reached her. Hazel had secluded herself with a warrior, and the attendants had been instructed not to interrupt them under any circumstances. Marian frowned, suspicion darkening her face. Her thoughts churned with unease. The notion that they were simply conversing seemed far too convenient. Her instincts warned her otherwise. She instructed Juan to bring her to them at once, unable to suppress the growing urgency in her chest. Behind closed doors, Alan and Hazel were engaged in what they called late-night yoga. The room was dimly lit by the flickering lanterns, shadows stretching across the walls with each movement. Alan appeared far too relaxed, clearly enjoying the situation more than he should have. He remarked with amusement that the soldiers would probably enjoy seeing Hazel like this, suggesting with a smirk that it might serve as a fitting reward for their dedication. He moved to the door and pushed it open slightly, glancing down the hallway and noting that it was empty, seemingly pleased by the lack of observers. Hazel, flustered, demanded that he close the door and return inside at once, her voice sharp with urgency. Alan remained indifferent, stating that it made little difference whether the door was open or shut. He hinted that she was enjoying herself more than she pretended, his tone lightly teasing. Before they could say more, shouts erupted from outside the chamber. The voices of soldiers echoed through the halls, filled with urgency and panic. They called for immediate reinforcement at the castle walls. Alan stepped back, commenting that she was fortunate this time. There might not be another interruption in the future. He added casually that she was clearly more capable than she liked to admit, before muttering to himself that while yoga was fun, it was less enjoyable when it risked exposure. Hazel suddenly tensed, her posture alert. She whispered that someone was coming, her eyes fixed on the door. Her expression paled as the footsteps grew louder and more distinct. It was Marian. The door creaked open, and there stood the saint, arms crossed, her eyes quietly blazing. She remained silent, but her gaze scanned the room with a mixture of disbelief and restrained anger. Her thoughts churned. She had suspected something, but seeing it with her own eyes confirmed what her instincts had already told her. They were too exposed, and they hadn't even bothered to conceal it. Alan, unfazed, glanced in her direction. He noted her presence as if it were an afterthought and without hesitation told her to stand guard and ensure no one else entered. He added that they needed to finish their yoga session as if nothing were amiss. Hazel turned to him in disbelief, barely able to contain her frustration. She reminded him that they had already been caught, but Alan simply shrugged, reasoning that since they had been discovered, there was no use in stopping now. Hazel looked as though she might collapse from embarrassment. Marian said nothing. She stood at the threshold, her thoughts simmering. She recalled how Alan had never once offered to train with her. Not once had he invited her for these so-called yoga sessions. Instead, he had asked her to wait outside like a servant while he entertained himself behind closed doors with the lady of the palace. A quiet rage built inside her. Whatever feelings stirred hurt, betrayal, resentment, she pushed them down. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her cloak swaying behind her, hands clenched tightly at her sides. Whatever had just happened between them, it would have to wait. The Demon Lord's army was approaching, and at that moment, it felt as if she were the only one still taking it seriously. Alan asked Marion why she was there. In response, Marion explained that the Demon Lord's army had begun to gather. Alan acknowledged that they had anticipated such an event and informed her that they would be moving out first. He instructed her to get ready and meet them outside. Marion agreed with a simple, okay. Suddenly, a soldier rushed in with urgent news. He addressed them as warrior and saint and reported that Lord Lloyd had taken it upon himself to lead the gathered troops beyond the walls to confront the enemy. Alarmed, Marion questioned whether John had simply allowed that to happen. The soldier replied that John had not been there in time to stop Lord Lloyd and had already left in pursuit to catch up with him. Distressed, Marion pointed out that there was no hope of victory in the current state of their forces and questioned why no one had tried to stop Lloyd. The soldier explained with a sense of helplessness that they were not permitted to disobey or make independent commands out of fear of death. Marion, deep in thought, blamed Lloyd, referring to him bitterly as that Lloyd's dad boy for the chaos they were all now facing. Meanwhile, a battle was already underway. Lloyd and John were fighting at the front lines. John desperately defended Lloyd, urging him to flee for his safety. As John was struck by an enemy soldier, a goat-headed demon commander appeared before Lloyd. Terrified, Lloyd screamed for the demon not to come any closer. In panic, he shouted that his mother was the Lord Regent, someone immensely powerful, and warned that she would destroy them all. The demon commander moved to attack Lloyd with a rod, but before the blow could land, Alan appeared, catching the mid-strike. With a calm yet irritated tone, he remarked on how unsettling the situation was. Marion had arrived at his side as well. At the demon commander's order, the enemy soldiers surged forward to kill the intruders. Alan, observing the chaos, sensed something was off. He remembered that in his past life, the attack had been led by a demon commander resembling a cow who would never have delegated leadership to someone else. Turning to Marion, Alan instructed her to watch his back and handle anything that came from behind. She agreed. Marion then turned her attention to Lloyd, tending to his wounds and urging him to remain still so she could heal him. As she worked, a thought crossed her mind, realizing that perhaps the bonds they shared were more meaningful than she had believed. Lloyd, despite his condition, grumbled that she was late and called her useless. Marion reassured him gently, telling him it would be over soon, though internally she wrestled with a darker thought. Part of her questioned whether she should just let him die, given all the lives that had been lost because of him. Her mind drifted back to the soldier who had explained how their people couldn't disobey orders due to the looming threat of death. Marion realized that many of them had been left without choices, all because of this boy's reckless decisions. As she tried to heal him with her holy powers, she was stunned to find that they weren't working. Alan, having defeated the remaining enemies, confronted the goat-headed demon commander. He questioned if the demon was truly in charge. The commander, shocked by Alan's strength, admitted that he hadn't been warned by his lords that someone like Alan would be present. Alan pressed further, asking if the commander had a companion that resembled a cow. The demon laughed, explaining that such a one wouldn't bother to come out just to fight someone he considered small fry. Alan, unbothered by the insult, confirmed that the cow-headed commander was not there and swiftly killed the goat-headed demon with his sword. As he looked over the battlefield, he reflected that events were already diverging from what he remembered in his past life. Nothing was unfolding as it once had. Marion called out to him, seemingly struggling to find the right words. Alan asked if she was about to wrap things up, but Marion hesitated before revealing that something was wrong. Her holy powers had ceased to work. Later, in a room inside the Burster Castle, Alan sat quietly. Marion entered and announced her presence, informing him that Lloyd's condition was now stable thanks to the use of healing potions. However, she noted that Lloyd had lost too much blood and warned that without her magic, he might still die. She questioned what she should do now, voicing her fear and despair at the thought of being a saint without any holy powers. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, she made a request asking Alan if he could hold her that night, confessing that she was overwhelmed with worry and anxiety. Alan, composed, told her that if that was what she truly wanted, he would consider it, but not if she was in her current state. Just then, Marion's appearance changed drastically. Her form shifted into that of a horned woman. Alan immediately saw through the deception, grabbing her and declaring that she had picked the wrong person to try to fool. He called her out by name Lilith. Lilith, realizing she had been caught, responded playfully. She asked what Alan intended to do with her now and wondered aloud if he was truly going to fight her. Alan seized Lilith by the neck and forcefully hurled her across the room. She tumbled to the ground but quickly stood up, brushing herself off with a sly smirk. With a provocative tone, she remarked that it seemed this was what Alan had wanted all along. After all, he was a man and claimed she had come for the same purpose. She teased that she wanted him to teach her late-night yoga, assuring him that she would be gentle. Unmoved by her words, Alan grabbed her once again and declared coldly that her tactics had failed this time. He told her that her soul was far outmatched by his and that such weak enchantments would never work on someone like him. Still holding her in place, he added that if it was truly instruction she sought, he would see to it that she received it. Internally, Alan reflected on the situation with calculated focus. It was his first time performing this kind of training exercise in real life, and to think it was with a lowly demon masquerading in human form made it all the more unexpected. He noted that anyone who dared enter his room alone should be prepared for the consequences. Meanwhile, Lilith was starting to regret her choices. The situation, she thought, was spiraling out of control. She realized that she should have escaped while she still had the chance. Alan began demonstrating the so-called late-night yoga, his demeanor composed and relentless. As the session dragged on and the intensity grew, Lilith, now clearly overwhelmed, gasped and finally exclaimed that she could take no more. During the training session, Lilith found herself wondering how Alan never seemed to tire from all the intense exercises. She questioned internally how he managed it while she struggled and admitted to herself that part of her reason for observing him so closely was simply because she wanted to spy on him. Based on his actions and demeanor, she concluded that he must be new to this place and that perhaps he was still trying to understand the current state of things within the castle. Resigned to her circumstances, Lilith quietly accepted her fate and pleaded with a subdued voice, asking him to stop making such remarks and to just do whatever he intended. Alan, observing her carefully, noted to himself that she didn't appear to be particularly obsessed with training. There was something in her attitude that suggested indifference or perhaps a deeper reason behind her reluctance. Looking at her, he questioned how he could place his trust in the things she was saying. After a moment of consideration, Alan finally responded by suggesting they bring the current conversation to an end. Hearing this, Lilith lifted her gaze slightly and reminded him that she was, after all, a high-ranking demon. She added that as long as she remained alive, no amount of training, no matter how intense, would be enough to truly break her. However, Alan remained firm. He declared that they already had enough training as it was, and if she truly wanted to push things further, then she should start by revealing the current situation of the demon army. Lilith, understanding what he truly sought, responded with calm readiness, stating that if that was what he desired, she was prepared to tell him everything he wanted to know. Alan confronted her with sharp intensity, demanding that she tell him the truth about Cao, who was originally supposed to be there. He warned her firmly to speak clearly before he lost his temper and made a mess of the situation. Lilith admitted that Alan was right. Cao had indeed been the one assigned to come and face the Sword of Light. However, she explained that the plan had changed just a day before Cao was meant to depart. Alan, clearly agitated, pressed her further and asked why the plan had been altered. He wondered aloud if it was the Demon Lord herself who had ordered the change. Lilith confirmed it, though she seemed reluctant to elaborate. When he asked why a Demon Lord would make such a decision, she replied evasively, saying that no one truly knew. Something about her demeanor caught Alan's attention. She appeared slightly more anxious than usual, off balance in a way that wasn't typical for her. Reflecting on it, he realized that she had been acting this way more and more lately. He looked at her and asked if she was implying that the Demon Lord was nervous. The thought spiraled in his mind. The Demon Lord, whom he had barely managed to defeat in a past life, was now second-guessing herself and altering her plans. He began to wonder if she, too, was becoming confused or uncertain. Sensing a shift in his energy, Lilith asked what was wrong with him. He brushed it off, telling her that nothing was wrong and that she could leave now. But Lilith reminded him that he had promised to teach her late-night yoga if she revealed what she knew about the situation. Alan, unwilling to concede just yet, told her that he would keep his word if she did something for him in return. Curious, Lilith asked what he wanted her to do. Alan leaned in close and whispered something into her ear. Whatever he said made her smile with mischievous delight. She responded playfully, saying that it sounded fun and she would do it, but he had better keep his promise. Shifting the topic, Lilith mentioned the saint she had transformed into earlier, commenting that the saint no longer had any power. Wasn't that right? She offered a piece of advice, telling Alan that holy power and demonic power were surprisingly similar, both operating through the same fundamental mechanism, desire. She laughed as she spoke, admitting that she was only telling him this because he had managed to make her happy that day. With a parting smile, she said she would see him again. Alan watched her leave, his thoughts turning inward. He considered Lilith's abilities and her skill in shape-shifting and magical exchange, recalling how such talents had once thrown humanity into disarray. They had been particularly troublesome in the past, and now having someone like her on his side felt like an unexpected victory. He never would have thought the day would come when Lilith would become an ally. He was determined to make good use of her. As he sat in contemplation, his mind turned to the nature of holy and dark powers. They were opposites, yet functionally alike. He wondered if the saint hadn't refused to heal him earlier, but rather had been unable to do so. Still, he found her actions unforgivable. If she truly couldn't use her powers now, she would be of no use to him. Elsewhere, Marian was kneeling before the statue of the goddess, praying earnestly. Her voice trembled as she pleaded not to be abandoned by the deity she served. Her mind echoed with cruel words someone had once thrown at her: when the temple collapses, you must return to the brothel. She wept silently and begged for her powers to be restored, refusing to accept that fate. Suddenly, she sensed a presence behind her. Alan was standing there, having quietly approached while she was deep in prayer. Marian gasped in shock upon seeing him, stammering as she asked what he was doing there. She pleaded for a little more time. But without saying a word, Alan drew his sword and cut off his own arm. Marian screamed in horror, pleading with him to stop. She rushed to heal him, her hands glowing as she instinctively used her powers, and to her surprise, the healing worked. Staring at her hands, she gasped in disbelief, realizing that her powers had returned. She could hardly comprehend how it was possible. Alan looked at her and calmly said that she hadn't been lying after all. He added that an old friend of his had given him some advice. The source of holy powers, just like dark ones, was desire. Marian, still in shock, protested, insisting that holy power came solely from the goddess and could not be obtained in any other way. Alan challenged her further, asking why she had been able to heal him just now yet hadn't been able to do the same for the little boy. Marian faltered. She whispered that he was the warrior and there was something different about him. She also began to feel that he was getting too close and something about his behavior was unexpectedly different. Then Alan made his request clear. He told her to heal Lloyd. If she did, he promised to take her with him just as she had always wanted. Marian's face turned pale. She realized he knew everything. Choking on her words, she asked why, if he understood how much she had suffered all this time, he had been so cruel to her in the past. Alan looked at her with an unreadable expression. He told her that in their past life, she had been too unkind and too cruel. He asked if she had even once thought about how he felt back then. Marian could no longer hold back her tears and cried without restraint. He gently said that he was here now, urging her to look at him. With a deep breath, he asked if they should begin. He admitted that it had taken everything in him to restrain himself during training. While they were playing the game, Marian found herself overwhelmed with a sense of contentment. Alan observed her closely, sensing that she might be growing tired. Gently, he asked whether she was in any pain. Marian didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him in quiet thought, noticing how soft and tender his voice had become. Eventually, she assured him that she was fine, saying she felt good. Alan, too, was caught up in his thoughts. There was something about the energy between them, an unfamiliar, deeply stirring sensation that felt entirely distinct from anything he had experienced before. It wasn't just physical, it was a different kind of power, subtle and consuming. Marian's attention briefly shifted to the protein bar nearby, and she found herself admiring it with genuine appreciation. Everything around her seemed to be glowing with a gentle warmth. In that moment, she acknowledged to herself that this man Alan had complete control over her. The thought didn't trouble her. On the contrary, she felt genuinely happy. Her heart fluttered as she realized that the way he was looking at her was making her feel cherished in a way she hadn't known before. Alan broke the silence and asked if she was enjoying the game. She responded with a soft smile, calling him warrior as she admitted that the experience felt incredibly good. He smiled in return, expressing his happiness that she was enjoying it. Inside, Alan continued to reflect. Perhaps he was beginning to soften, he thought, perhaps because she was finally seeing him not just as a warrior, but as a man. A man who could make her feel something different, something new. Marian found herself overwhelmed with conflicting thoughts, silently reminding herself that she was supposed to be a woman of the church. Yet, everything that had transpired had left her emotionally unsettled. Alan, noticing her state, suggested she continue with the resistance band exercises and asked her to promise that everything between them would remain private. When Marian heard him refer to it as something shared between them using the word as, her heart stirred with a sudden warmth. The meaning behind that word echoed in her mind. She wondered if he truly meant it, if there really was an us now. The thought made her feel dizzy and unsteady, but she managed to softly express her condition. Alan praised her, acknowledging that she had done well and advising her to rest. In his own thoughts, he concluded that she would be fine for now and privately admitted to himself that the session had not been unpleasant for him either. Before leaving, he reminded her once more not to forget what he had asked of her earlier. Marian, however, didn't want him to leave. She begged him not to go, insisting that there was nothing unusual in her request. She simply wanted to repeat the session. In her heart, a quiet fear lingered, the fear that if she let him go now, he might return to his former distant self. She wanted reassurance, a confirmation that what she felt wasn't just fleeting. Alan turned around, taken aback by the urgency in her voice. He asked her what exactly she wanted to do again. Marian, avoiding his gaze, clarified in a soft voice that she meant the resistance band session. Alan thought to himself that she was still hesitant, still circling around the truth. He admitted internally that he understood what she meant, but told her that he was beginning to feel exhausted. If she asked him sincerely, he might consider it. Marian, realizing what he wanted, shifted her tone and demeanor. She became more polite, respectful, and sincere in her request. She asked if he could do yoga with her again. Alan responded by thinking that she needed to be more specific about what she was asking. Marian, blushing and lowering her eyes once more, repeated her request in a more open and honest manner. This time, Alan acknowledged that it was closer to what he wanted to hear. But he reminded her that he was tired now and if they were to proceed, she would have to take the lead during the session. Lloyd was conscious and lying on the bed while John sat quietly beside him. Marian approached and began healing John's injuries. Once she finished, she announced that it was all done. John was genuinely surprised, expressing disbelief that her healing had worked so effectively, especially since even the priests had given up on him. Hazel, witnessing this, felt indebted to Marian and declared that she was now their saint for healing first Lloyd and then John. Marian humbly replied that it was all done according to the warrior's wishes. Alan, observing the interaction, found the situation somewhat bothersome and asked Marian if she was finished yet. Marian confirmed that both Lloyd and John were now healthy. Alan then called Hazel aside for a moment and the two left together, leaving Marian standing nearby with a look of happiness. Once inside a room, Alan locked the door and asked Hazel what was wrong. He informed her that the demon army was expected to attack their location in 4 days. Hazel was shocked, unable to understand how that could be, since she thought Alan had killed their leader while rescuing Lloyd. Alan explained that the forces they had encountered so far were merely scouting parties and that the main army was still on its way. Hazel asked if he would help them as he had promised. Alan assured her that he would, but added that it would depend on how she and others behaved. Alan reflected silently on the reality that he had been chosen by the goddess, had fought tirelessly throughout his life, and had devoted himself to eliminating the demon lord. Yet in the end, he had merely been used and then discarded. In his past life, his comrades had abandoned him the moment he lost his power. Without hesitation, they had turned their backs on him and left him to die. With that bitter memory etched into his soul, he had vowed to take revenge on every one of them. And so, having faced the demon lord once more, he returned to the past with a mission. In this second chance at life, he had started gathering his former comrades just as before. He had forced Genoa into submission, personally educated the dim-witted Lord Hazel, punished Lilith the demoness who had made his previous life hell, and made the perpetually selfish Marian face her own shortcomings. His journey of vengeance had only just begun, and he promised to deliver an even more devastating fate to those who had wronged him. Among them, there were still those who deserved punishment above all, and this was only the beginning. Hazel, uncertain but determined, asked what she should do to meet his demands. Alan immediately told her to stop what she was doing and questioned whether she even considered herself a lord. He pointed out that, at that moment, there was no difference between her and an ordinary servant. Hazel attempted to explain herself, saying she had believed that if she offered herself to him, he would protect them. Alan dismissed her reasoning, reminding her that he was just one man facing an entire army. At best, he could slow them down, but eventually they would breach the castle walls. He warned her that while she could watch from the safety of the fortress, Lloyd would not be safe in such a scenario. Hazel, panicked, asked what she should do. Alan challenged her again, asking whether she believed she could truly protect them. He pointed out that the strongest person there was Hazel herself. The knights, the weapons, the fortress walls, everything was part of her domain. If anyone was going to protect Lloyd, it would have to be her. As Alan observed her, he thought that the Hazel he had reunited with didn't seem like an evil person. She was a little dim, perhaps, but ignorance did not absolve guilt. He resolved to give her one chance. If she failed to change, he would personally punish her. Suddenly, John rushed in with an urgent message. The demon lord's army was gathering. Hazel calmly replied that she had just learned of it. John added that time was of the essence, they would attack by tomorrow at the current pace. Hazel was visibly shocked. She turned to Alan and reminded him that he had said they had 4 days. Alan admitted that the enemy had moved faster than he had expected. Sometimes, he added, things simply didn't go according to plan. He asked her what she would do now. Hazel, without hesitation, called out to John. When he answered, she instructed him to take in the refugees and arm anyone capable of fighting. She ordered that the remaining soldiers recall the people outside the castle walls and bring them inside. John was confused, asking if she was not going to defend the walls. Hazel explained that they didn't have enough troops to guard the entire perimeter. It would be wiser to defend everyone from within the castle itself. Then Hazel turned to Alan and requested that he leave the castle as soon as possible. John objected, concerned that if Alan left, they would be defeated and in grave danger. But Hazel ignored him, continuing to speak to Alan. She asked that once the fighting began, he would flank the enemy's front line and take down their leader. She explained that the enemy's attention would be focused on the castle, making it easier for him to accomplish the task. She asked if he could do her that favor. Alan smiled at her. He thought to himself that perhaps she did have a brain after all and that her behavior had only been a product of her surroundings. He agreed to her request, asking only that she properly defend the place. He admitted that her plan was not bad and complimented her on her leadership. Outside, Lilith approached Alan and reported that she had done as he had asked. She mentioned that the attack would not be very strong and that the enemy should be reaching the walls soon. Alan acknowledged her report but reminded her that she still had much left to do. Lilith replied with exasperation, stating that she was a high-ranking demon and had her pride she refused to do any more. But then she laughed and clarified that she had only been joking. Alan found it amusing and said it was a little funny. Then Alan cut his own arm with a sword and handed it to Lilith. She thanked him for it. Alan replied that their business was concluded and told her to go ahead and take it with her. Just as he turned away, Lilith interrupted and asked him something. She wondered aloud if he had really needed the castle to be under this much pressure. Alan admitted that not really, he had simply wanted to test something. Inside the castle, John and the remaining soldiers had succeeded in repelling the enemy forces and defeating them. Just then, Alan returned. As he entered, the soldiers began to cheer and surround him. Hazel ran up to him, full of gratitude, and thanked him, saying it was all thanks to him. Alan looked at her, thinking that she had passed the test. He told her that he believed she had done well too and congratulated her. Hazel expressed her thanks once more. Alan then turned and said it was time to go. They still had much to do, especially regarding Marion, Lydia's magic power, and other matters. Elsewhere, Karen Cross was seated in a room, observing the soldiers and making notes. She was studying the differences in monster sensitivity and noted that the larger monsters seemed to be less responsive to stimuli. Suddenly, the door opened with a knock. A voice announced that the warrior had returned as the future leader of the tower. Hearing that, Karen Cross began laughing with delight. Alan and Marion were walking together through the palace corridors. As they strolled side by side, Marion occasionally glanced at Alan, her mind a storm of thoughts. She reflected on how just a few days ago she couldn't have imagined having the warrior so close. Yet, despite that dreamlike moment, she knew her goal had not yet been achieved. She then asked him casually if he was hungry and suggested that they have lunch together. She mentioned knowing a great cafe and invited him to go with her. Internally, her thoughts were anything but casual. She was determined to make him hers. Just then, Genoa appeared with a burst of energy, her eyes lighting up with joy as she greeted the warrior. She expressed how happy she was to finally see him again. Marion quickly stepped forward, taking Genoa's hand firmly. She remarked that Genoa had clearly been longing for the warrior, but questioned whether this was the proper behavior to show someone who looked so obviously exhausted. With a sharp tone, she told Genoa that she was dishonoring herself. Genoa, slightly taken aback, responded with a sarcastic smile, questioning whether Marion truly had the right to speak of honor. She found it ironic that such words came from Marion, who herself was walking beside the warrior. Marion responded without hesitation, claiming that such closeness was only natural. According to their faith, she explained, the saintess and the warrior were one in body and mind, a union ordained by the goddess herself. Genoa, unimpressed, questioned the claim with a raised eyebrow. She pointed out that she carried the token given to her by the warrior himself and considered herself the one most suited to stand by his side. Marion's mood darkened instantly. Her voice rose sharply as she accused Genoa of twisting words and declared that the token was proof of nothing but Genoa's scheming nature. Genoa shot back, suggesting that Marion sounded merely jealous. Marion, growing more agitated, insisted that the warrior had told her directly. Genoa simply laughed, claiming that Marion must have dreamed that up. Marion shouted that she had not, and the argument quickly spiraled into chaos, the two women throwing accusations and biting words at each other, their dignified roles all but forgotten in the heat of rivalry. Some time later, Alan was seated calmly in a chamber with Genoa beside him. He asked if the elves and dwarves were currently inside the castle. Genoa confirmed that they were, explaining that their lands had also been invaded by the demon lord's armies. They had come to request aid from the kingdom. Alan asked what the kingdom had decided regarding their plea. Genoa informed him that no decision had yet been made. As she spoke, Alan's mind drifted into thought. In the original timeline, it had been the humans who were first attacked. But now the future had shifted. He wasn't sure whether it was due to his interventions or some unknown influence. For now, he would simply have to wait for Lilith to return before drawing conclusions. Genoa suddenly broke the silence, saying she could wait no longer. She asked Alan to give her a chance, revealing that she had fully prepared herself for the next training session. Alan responded with a bit of amusement, wondering aloud what would happen if Marion were to walk in and find them both working out together. Genoa scoffed, confidently saying that the crazy woman, as she called Marion, would not be back for a while. Marion had many duties to attend to and wouldn't interfere anytime soon. Then, with sincerity, Genoa looked at Alan and told him that she had been thinking of him every day. Alan nodded, acknowledging her words and telling her that she was indeed quite loyal to him. After the yoga session, Alan jokingly asked Genoa if she was still alive. She laughed and replied that she was indeed still the commander of the knights, and teased him by asking if he planned to keep punishing her. He assured her that of course he would. She then grew curious and asked why he was so invested in teaching her yoga. Alan explained that practicing yoga helped him melt away his stress and said he would see her around. Genoa smiled and told him she would be waiting and that they should do an even longer session next time. As he glanced back at her, he couldn't help but think that she was completely insane. Calling out to Marion, Alan urged her to hurry up, mentioning how much time had already passed. Meanwhile, Marion had made her way to the room and, upon seeing Alan inside doing yoga, felt a surge of anger. She muttered to herself that Genoa had once again invited Alan into her room under the pretense of yoga training. Her frustration swelled. She refused to let Genoa take him so easily. With renewed determination, she swung the door open, announcing her presence by declaring that she was there now, calling out to the warrior. But as the door fully opened, she stopped in her tracks, stunned. Inside the room were not just Alan and Genoa but Princess Mary as well. Marion stood there, overwhelmed with disbelief, thinking to herself in rising panic, where did that insane warrior woman even get her hands on him now? Princess Mary addressed Alan with composed dignity, noting that she had read the report detailing his heroic actions in the Butler region. She commended him for his bravery and thanked him for saving her people. Marion stood silently nearby, feeling a mixture of unease and frustration. She knew Alan had only done his duty there, and yet simply standing beside him now made her pulse quicken with anxiety. Mary reminded Alan that he had mentioned having a request and encouraged him to speak his mind. Without hesitation, Alan expressed that his request was for Princess Mary herself to ascend the throne. His words struck the room with silence, catching everyone off guard. Genoa immediately objected, her voice laced with disbelief. She reminded him that there was already a crown prince in line for the throne and questioned how he could say such a thing so easily. Mary, maintaining her composure, stated that it was clear Alan was not joking. She asked him directly whether he was encouraging her to commit treason. Alan replied without flinching, saying that he was not explicitly suggesting treason but merely urging her not to hesitate should an opportunity to claim the throne arise in the future. The princess's tone shifted to one of concern. She said that she did not understand what Alan was planning, but she could not support any action that would plunge the nation into chaos. She chose to pretend she had never heard his suggestion and left the room quietly, her expression unreadable. After her departure, Marion turned to Alan, her voice filled with anger and disbelief. She demanded to know whether he truly intended to bring ruin to the kingdom while the demon lord's armies still marched upon them. Genoa, sensing the rising tension, attempted to calm her, suggesting that perhaps the situation wasn't as disastrous as it seemed. Marion, however, snapped at her, asking whether she understood the implications of what Alan had proposed. Genoa answered without hesitation, pointing out that the current king, Patrick, had been persecuting the clergy and rejecting the will of the goddess for his own benefit. In her view, Princess Mary, being a moderate and fair-minded noble, could alleviate much of the damage. Moreover, since the warrior's strength was derived from the goddess, it would only serve Alan's cause if the clergy's influence were restored. Marion fired back that the royal family would never allow such a shift in power to happen. She warned that if this path were followed, a civil war would surely erupt and countless innocent lives would be caught in the crossfire. Alan had heard enough. With an edge to his voice, he commanded them all to be silent. He made it clear that he would handle matters himself and that they were not to overstep their bounds. He turned to Genoa and told her that he had no intention of becoming a pawn for the clergy, and she was mistaken if she thought otherwise. Then, addressing Marion, he scolded her for her constant doubt and interference. He reminded her that he had allowed her to remain by his side as a comrade, but she was beginning to act more like a hindrance. He told both women plainly that he no longer wished to be surrounded by people who doubted his every move. Without another word, he left them standing there in stunned silence. As Alan walked away, he reflected on the situation with cold clarity. He had anticipated such resistance. The fact that they had shared training sessions and fought side by side meant little when trust was still a fragile illusion. He suspected that Princess Mary cared more for her public image than true loyalty, and he had never intended to accept her so easily anyway. Marian remained behind, filled with regret. She silently scolded herself for her outburst, wondering whether Alan was still angry. She cursed herself for saying too much too soon. Gathering what courage she had left, she asked softly where they should meet the next day. Alan didn't even glance back as he replied that he had no time for meetings. He stated that he no longer needed her or anyone hovering around him. Her heart sank. She questioned aloud why he was suddenly being so cold, reminding him that he had once said he trusted her. But his response was sharp. He questioned why he should trust someone who constantly challenged his decisions. He asked whether she truly thought he was treating all of this like a game. Marian apologized, her voice trembling. She said that she had been surprised by what he had said earlier and didn't mean to question his judgment. She promised not to do it again and asked him for forgiveness. Alan asked her how she intended to prove her sincerity. Panic surged in Marian's chest. She couldn't bear the thought of losing his favor now. She asked what she needed to do for him to forgive her. He told her simply that if she wanted forgiveness, she should join him in a cardio session immediately. Confused and embarrassed, she asked why he wanted to do such a thing so suddenly and whether they could simply go to her room instead. His expression remained firm as he told her to follow his orders without question. She hesitated, pointing out that they were still outside. It was late and they were in the middle of the city. If anyone saw her like this in her current dress, performing a cardio session in the open, it would be humiliating. Alan, unyielding, told her once again that it was her choice. If she didn't want to follow him, she was free to walk away and leave him alone. Realizing she had no other option, Marian began the cardio session, struggling to keep her movements graceful while asking if this made him happy. Alan acknowledged her effort and told her to follow him. As they walked, Marian's mind was in turmoil. Though the sun had already set and shadows wrapped the city like a cloak, she could still feel the weight of public eyes. Her face burned with shame at the thought of being seen like this, but at the same time, her heart ached at the distance growing between them. Even if she was pushed to the edge of her pride, she wasn't ready to let go of him yet. Marian was overwhelmed with anxiety, thinking to herself that her life would be over if anyone saw her dressed like that. She feared they might notice her at any moment, and the thought terrified her. With a trembling voice, she pleaded, telling the warrior to forgive her and saying she was sorry. She insisted that she had walked far enough already. Alan, however, responded coldly, questioning why she would decide something like that on her own. He told her to stay quiet and keep walking, reminding her that they were still far from their destination. Suddenly, Marian heard approaching footsteps. Panic surged through her, and she urged that they needed to get away immediately. But Alan calmly replied, asking where she intended to run to, and he suggested they go and greet the people instead. As they moved forward, a group of servants stood there, all of them visibly shocked by her appearance. They asked in disbelief, addressing her as Saintess and demanding to know what had happened to her. Marian felt as if it were all over now. There was no way to hide. Among the murmuring crowd, some began questioning aloud why the Saintess would be outside, dressed in such a manner, and at such an odd hour. Others speculated that it might just be someone who looked like her, someone trying to imitate the Saintess. They wondered if that wasn't dangerous. Alan turned to the crowd and asked with a smirk whether they, too, thought she resembled the Saintess. He then told them that she was merely a new slave he had acquired for himself. One man, evidently amused and impressed, commented that Alan was fortunate to have obtained a slave who bore such a strong resemblance to the Saintess, calling her an upgraded product. Marian's thoughts spiraled. None of them had recognized her. Was that a good thing, she wondered? Yet the way the men stared at her, eyes full of greed, made her feel sick. Alan stepped in firmly, warning them not to lay a hand on what belonged to him. He tapped one of them lightly and threatened that if they wished to keep their hands intact, they should back off. Without waiting for a reply, he told Marian they should continue. Marian turned to him and asked softly whether it was over for him now. Alan gave a cold chuckle and replied that it was only the beginning. He told her they would now perform late-night yoga right there. Horrified, she protested, saying that if they did it in that place, people would surely see them. But Alan dismissed her concerns, asking who cared. He reminded her that just moments ago she had been terrified of being abandoned by him, but now she suddenly valued her dignity more. That, he said, was exactly why she wouldn't be forgiven, and he added that everyone around must have already heard it all by now. Alan turned to Marian and asked if she understood what she had done wrong. Marian responded with quiet remorse, saying that she did understand. She promised that from now on, she would trust him no matter what. Then, looking at him with uncertainty, she asked what he intended to do next. Meanwhile, the servants nearby were filled with panic and confusion. They were alarmed by the strange sounds coming from that area, murmuring among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. One of them, Devar, voiced his concern aloud, saying the noise was too loud and suggested they should call the guards. Marian's thoughts were spiraling once more. She feared that everyone could now hear them clearly, and at this rate she would surely be exposed. Her mind raced with dread as she thought that it was all about to come to an end. Not far from the scene, Karen Cross sat calmly, observing everything with a composed demeanor. She addressed them, stating that she had been waiting for them both, warrior Alan and Saintess Marian. Alan turned toward her and acknowledged her presence, remarking that it had been a while. Karen looked at him curiously and asked if he truly remembered her, expressing doubt. Alan, however, dismissed her question sharply, saying that whether or not he knew her was none of her concern. He asked her directly what she wanted. Karen replied without hesitation. She said what she wanted was for him to come with her, though she made it clear she would much prefer if he came of his own free will. Alan considered her offer and replied that he could go with her, but questioned why she didn't first come down from the wall. He pointed out that the way she was looking down on him didn't exactly resemble someone who was making a request. Karen responded by using her holy power to gracefully descend from the wall, but instead of replying, she immediately launched a fire attack at him. Alan defended himself swiftly and, with a mocking tone, commented that responding with an attack was amusing. He asked whether he should interpret it as a challenge. Karen, unfazed, remarked that something of immortal value was always interesting to her. Now that she was down, she added, they could continue their conversation properly. Alan narrowed his eyes as he watched her, thinking to himself that she hadn't changed at all. Karen Cross, once hailed as a genius, had achieved the 7th circle of magic upon reaching adulthood. In his past life, she had joined their side under the pretense of researching his powers. Though she had been officially assigned to help defeat the Demon King and her abilities had indeed contributed significantly to their combat efforts, she had also constantly tried to extract pieces of his body for her studies. A vivid flashback surged in Alan's mind. He remembered a time when Karen had severed his arm. He had been injured, and rather than healing him immediately, she had suggested they waste some time before helping him recover. He had asked her in confusion, why him? To which she had coldly replied, what are you talking about? Snapping back to the present, Karen now stood before them, chiding Alan for throwing a fireball at them earlier while claiming to want a conversation. She questioned whether he was joking. Then, shifting tone, she admitted that she knew how powerful he was and had thought talking would be more practical than fighting. Turning her attention to Marian, she asked what the Saintess was doing there, but quickly dismissed the question. She made it clear that the one she was truly interested in was Alan. His immortality, she confessed, fascinated her, and she wished to use him in her research. Alan let out a laugh, finding her utterly shameless. He asked what he was supposed to gain from helping her. Karen simply replied that he shouldn't think so much about gain, and added, with unsettling calmness, that she promised not to kill him. He laughed again, amused by the absurdity. Inwardly, he thought he must be losing his mind, but admitted the offer was at least interesting. He agreed, saying he would go with her. Marian protested immediately, urging him not to go. She warned him that he didn't know what Karen might do to him. But Alan snapped at her to be quiet. He reminded her of the promise she had just made. Had she already forgotten it? He then asked if she needed to be educated again. Frightened, Marian apologized instantly, saying she was sorry. Alan turned back to Karen and told her to lead the way. As Karen and Alan walked together, Alan noted with irritation that it was taking a while and asked how much longer it would be. Karen replied cryptically that the location didn't matter. What mattered was that no one could hear them. She explained that the sounds people made when they were cut off weren't exactly quiet. Alan raised an eyebrow at her words and questioned whether this was the kind of research she had been talking about. He then asked if she hadn't heard about the incident at the palace. Karen, caught off guard, asked what incident he was referring to. Alan answered with a cryptic statement, saying that he didn't give his arm to just anyone, only to those who were strong enough to take it from him. Karen sighed with disappointment and remarked that it was a shame. She had hoped he would be more cooperative. He replied coldly that she should only wish for things that were actually possible. Without further words, the two of them began fighting. At one point, Alan managed to restrain her with a chain, knocking her to the ground. Standing over her, he declared that no matter how much he tried to think otherwise, he simply couldn't forgive her. He stepped back and added firmly that he had done his part and now it was her turn. Karen stood there, stunned, as her mind reeled from what had just happened. She couldn't believe it. She had never encountered anyone like him before. He had evaded her magic as though it were nothing. Alan, meanwhile, looked at her with a calm, unsettling expression and informed her that it was now his turn to conduct an experiment on her. Confused, Karen narrowed her eyes and asked what kind of experiment he was referring to. Alan responded mockingly, questioning when the genius woman from the magic tower would finally begin to beg him for mercy. His voice carried a cold amusement that made Karen's jaw tighten. With defiance in her tone, she replied that she didn't see that happening anytime soon. She reminded him that it was her turn again and that he shouldn't underestimate her. Without hesitation, she began gathering mana, forming a blazing fireball between her hands. She scoffed and claimed that he had merely caught her off guard earlier and that wouldn't happen again. With a renewed fury, she said she took back the decision to let him live. Her voice became sharp and cold as she declared she would grind him down to his bones and analyze every piece of him. Alan studied her carefully. Even as she threatened him, he was lost in thought, speculating whether it was because he had met her earlier in this life than in his previous one. If that was the case, he thought it was somewhat pathetic how little she had changed. Suddenly, Karen hurled the fireball at him, shouting for him to take it. But Alan, unshaken, neutralized the attack effortlessly once again. Without giving her time to recover, he engaged her in direct combat. They exchanged blows and magic, but the tide was turning against Karen. She began to realize she was losing, and the thought filled her with disbelief. Her thoughts raced. This is insane. She had never been so thoroughly outmatched. Eventually, the battle came to a decisive end and she collapsed in defeat. Alan approached her and coldly declared that it was time to begin the experiment. Karen tried to protest, insisting that any form of torture would be useless. She calmly explained that she had already cast an anesthetizing spell on herself, rendering any pain-based method ineffective. Alan only smirked in response. He told her that was fine. After all, the first time playing a game in a new routine was always the most painful. Karen's expression changed. She began to feel something unfamiliar, an internal disruption. With strained breath, she asked him what he had done to her. Alan remained silent as he began what he called the night yoga with her, a euphemism for a process that involved intense magical and physical manipulation. As it went on, Karen could feel her mana circles destabilizing. Her body was reacting strangely, uncontrollably. Even her anesthetizing magic was beginning to falter under the pressure. Her mind screamed for composure, but she was losing grip. She realized with dawning horror that at this rate, even her strongest spells wouldn't be enough. Karen recalled how, when she was very young, she had shown an exceptional talent for sharp mana magic. Her parents had often praised her, remarking that her keen senses were the reason for her ability to detect mana so well. However, her mother expressed concern that this sharpness might not be entirely beneficial. When her father asked what could be done, her mother suggested binding Karen's sense of feeling within her mana circles. Although this might slightly reduce her mana sensitivity, it would be more important for Karen to live a happy and balanced life. Returning to the present, Karen was genuinely surprised to find that her mana circles had now broken. Alan laughed at her reaction and teased, asking if her mana circles had really broken just then. He joked about how the circles were meant to hold her senses, and if breaking them was the price of her sharpness, then she truly was a genius. Karen felt confused and wondered what was happening to her body. Alan explained that this was the moment for her to develop expertise in controlling herself. He said she had become very sensitive and now it was time for her education in managing that sensitivity. Karen threatened to kill him if he continued, feeling frustrated. At the same time, she thought about her current weakness, realizing that since her mana circles had broken, she couldn't use magic effectively. Alan reassured her that she would improve soon and told her to relax, teasing that what she had experienced so far wasn't enough and that the real challenge was just beginning. During the training session, Karen briefly lost consciousness, feeling numb and detached in that moment. As her senses gradually returned, she felt a wave of relief. Alan warned her not to pass out again, indicating that the process was far from over. Alan was thinking to himself that Karen was draining energy and mana from his body through their contact. He wondered if her mana sensitivity was increasing alongside her other senses, as it seemed she was steadily sucking away his mana just by touch. He found this somewhat convenient. Then, deciding to help, he told her he would share some of his power. Internally, he reasoned that at least she wouldn't die from this. He teased her, noting that she couldn't even speak properly anymore and mocked her for the old habit of launching things at people's backs. He asked how often he had to deal with such antics and then remarked that he thought he had found a better spot for their training session. Meanwhile, on the other side, Lilith was hiding behind a tree, thinking it should be safe now. She considered how heavily guarded the capital was and admitted she could barely breathe. She wondered what kind of war was going on here. Suddenly, she sniffed the air and sensed something unfamiliar surrounding her. Back with Alan and Karen, Alan noticed that Karen's mana circles were starting to recover. Although he hadn't intended it, he realized it was a positive development. He planned to strengthen their bond so she could become more useful. Suddenly, Lilith appeared before them and called out to Alan, saying she had been searching for him for a long time and asking what he was doing out here. Alan replied that he was simply training. Lilith asked what kind of training he was doing. When she saw Karen, she noted that Karen had 7 mana circles and commented that she was going to become a useful slave. However, she warned that the mana within those circles were powerful warriors. Alan said he understood now and realized what had happened. Lilith observed that Alan seemed to be having a lot of fun and asked if he wanted to learn an entertainment spell. Meanwhile, Karen lay on the floor, feeling overheated. She asked what was being done to her and warned that if this exercise continued, she might not hold up much longer. Karen, her voice filled with anger, demanded to know what Alan had done to her body. Alan responded casually, saying it was nothing significant, just a small contract between a servant and her master. Lilith, standing nearby, looked at Karen with mild amusement and asked why she was feeling so drained, insisting that she herself hadn't done anything to her. When Karen turned to Lilith and saw her more clearly, she realized in shock that she was a demon. She questioned why a demon was standing alongside a warrior. Alan replied coldly that it wasn't something for her to question and added, mockingly, "This is how it's done." Karen was growing increasingly unsettled. Her thoughts were in disarray. She couldn't understand what was happening to her body. Everything felt hot and unstable, as though something inside her was shifting. Alan, observing her discomfort, commented with satisfaction that the process was working remarkably well on her. He suggested that they test how far she could go without her mana, urging her to view the situation as a kind of business contract where he was the owner and she was the subordinate who had to obey. Karen let out a bitter laugh and challenged him, asking why he believed she would ever obey him. Alan merely smirked and asked what she thought would happen if she acted that way in front of others. Surely she would drop to her knees and beg for mercy, wouldn't she? Karen, realizing her vulnerability, quickly apologized, admitting she had made a mistake. Alan nodded approvingly, telling her that was better, but added that she could still do better. Karen, trying to correct herself, offered another apology, more sincere this time, and expressed regret for her behavior. He then declared that she had passed for now. Relieved, Karen thought to herself that perhaps it was finally over. But Alan, clearly not finished, told her that she still needed to prove her sincerity through her actions. He said she had to satisfy him through the training, specifically through the yoga exercises he had prescribed. Only if she performed properly would he consider forgiving her. Confused and frustrated, Karen asked what he meant by that, reminding him that he had just said he would forgive her if she begged. Alan countered that mere verbal apologies were not enough. It mattered that she truly accepted him as her master. Karen looked visibly shaken, her thoughts swirling with doubt and anger. She wondered why she was submitting to all of this and told herself that if she could just break free from this magic, she would not hesitate to kill him on the spot. Alan, catching the confusion in her expression, asked if she still didn't understand what he meant. Alan looked at Karen with disdain and thought how useless she was, wondering if she would ever become a useful slave. Karen lowered her head and offered a quiet apology, expressing that she was truly sorry. Alan, unimpressed, dismissed her words and mentally noted that he hadn't expected much from her to begin with. He decided to give her a simpler task and told her to just continue on her own. With that, he began instructing her on the basics of resistance band training, guiding her through the movements without much emotion. Lilith, sitting nearby and watching them, commented to herself that it was quite a show. She found it impressive, as expected from Alan, and considered it an interesting experience to witness the creation of yet another slave. Alan shifted his attention to Lilith and asked whether she had carried out the task he had assigned her. Lilith confirmed that she had delivered the message to Sai properly. Alan then asked her how the Demon Lord had responded. Lilith relayed that the Demon Lord had said she would think about it, though her tone hadn't conveyed much certainty. Alan took that as the final word and decided to move on. He instructed Lilith to return and tell the Demon Lord that he wanted to speak with her. Lilith accepted his order and assured him she would do so before departing. Left alone again, Alan reflected on the situation and concluded that it was time for him to implement some changes of his own. At that same time, in Alan's house, Lena was sleeping peacefully. She gradually woke up, disturbed by an unusual light that filled the room. The entire space was glowing, immersed in a radiant, divine brilliance. It felt alive, filled with an overwhelming presence. Lena slowly sat up, her eyes adjusting to the intense light. She tried to understand what was happening, questioning internally where the light was coming from. As she looked around in awe and confusion, her gaze finally settled on the origin of the glow. She was overcome with a sense of reverence and fear as she tried to comprehend the presence before her, silently wondering who the being was and why it had appeared in her room. Alan returned to his house and immediately noticed the lingering presence of the pillar of light that had appeared just moments earlier. Recognizing it, he thought to himself that he knew the truth behind that light. It was something he had seen before. Urgency filled his mind as he realized he needed to get inside the house quickly. As he arrived, Lena, who was inside, was caught off guard by the sudden presence at such an unusual hour. She peeked out to see who had come and was pleasantly surprised to find Alan standing there. Her face lit up with excitement as she greeted him warmly, expressing joy at his return and asking if he was finally done with work and no longer busy. Alan, although anxious, responded softly, saying he had found some free time. Internally, he was relieved to see that she appeared fine for the moment. Lena, still smiling, interpreted his words differently and remarked that he must still be busy then. Alan quickly shifted the topic and asked her about the light that had just appeared. Lena responded evasively, saying that she couldn't explain it clearly but reminded him that he was the world-saving warrior. She then invited him inside, expressing a desire to spend quality time with him as it had been a while since they were together. Both of them entered the house and settled into the room, beginning what turned into a one-on-one moment of closeness. Alan reflected on her words, acknowledging that it truly had been a long time. He noted that she must have been tired and the situation made him feel more self-conscious. He also admitted that he had to undergo intense physical training that night and as a result, he didn't think he could be gentle. Lena, hearing this, looked visibly happy, touched by his attention and the closeness they were about to share.